Good day. I'm Norman Walzer, and I'd like to spend a few minutes with you this morning to talk about shoes, how they were made, a little bit about changing styles, and then kind of spend some time looking through the actual process of making a shoe and kind of go from there. So to begin, shoes obviously have been around for a long time. And so we started with sandals and things, and so people traced their feet when they made the sandals. So there's a thought sometimes, or a lot of discussion about when did we have rights and lefts. We actually started with rights and lefts because when you traced around your foot, you had a pattern for each foot that was different. So they were, if you would, shaped shoes. In the middle 1850s, or in the middle 1500s, 1600s basically, we had a change to high heels for fashion. And when you have high heels, then the shoes have to be made differently. And the lasts that we were using had to be hand carved. So we start with any shoe. We start with a last, which is a piece of wood shaped like your foot. This is a hand carved last, probably from the 1840s. And most of the discussion today will be really 1840s, 1850s. Belvedere started in 1835, so it's pretty much the time period. So essentially you start with the last, and the closer your last fits to your foot or shaped to your foot, the better it'll be as far as comfort. So you start with the last, then you have basically inner sole that you put on next to the last, and then you have a set of uppers that I'm working on here that fit over the top. So the uppers would do something like this. Fit around. This is called the front upper part, and then it's the vamp, and then the back part is a quarter, and the quarters fit like this. So you sew them together, and they can be made in a lot of different varieties, but the essential ingredients in making a shoe really are the last, then the midsole, and then the uppers that go around, and then the outer sole. And the outer sole is what you typically see. So as you're looking at different types of shoes, the earliest shoes that in modern times really were what's called turn shoes. And these shoes were made so that the sole would then be put here, and then you turn it inside out. You wet it and turn it completely inside out. So this is pretty much a cheaper shoe. It's not as durable, probably wouldn't last as long, but it was, again, more common. In the say 1600s. But these were for basically everyday working type of people. In the 15s and 1600s, we had some very, very nice shoes that were handmade, high style, somewhat expensive in that period. But essentially, it was not that we really had crude shoes all the way through, let's say, till 1900 or something like that. We had very, very high quality shoes in the early periods. Now, when you get to more modern times, we had as I mentioned, in the 1600s, essentially we were with high heels. Now when you have a last, then the last has to be hand carved before about 1820s. So a hand carved last, essentially, if you have to make a right and a left, plus 3 different heel sizes on the last, it became very expensive. So relatively small shoemakers in a place like Belvedere would probably not have had a lot of lasts. So if you needed a different size, for example, a half size larger, you could put a piece of leather in the back and just expand it, or you could expand it here. So the lasts were adjustable, but in this particular case, it's still a straight last. Now, the different kinds of shoes that we have, some of the earliest shoes and the cheapest shoes would be something like this. So this has a last on the inside. It's neither right or left. It's just one piece of leather, and it's sewn up the back. And all of the sewing is done by hand. So you're looking at using boar bristles to guide the thread through the pieces of leather. What I'm working on here is a back. So essentially it would be something like this, as you can see being made here. So you have this shoe that has a midsole, has a shank to put in to kind of hold your heel and sole together, and then it's going to have a sole comes next. So there'd be a sole that would go onto the shoe, and then that particular shoe will end up being a shoe like this. So the soles are put together with wooden pegs. And so the pegs are made from maple, and the maple expands with water and expands and shrinks as the leather expands and shrinks. So as you're walking through the grass or something like that, you don't end up with the sole being ruined. If you were to use nails on the bottom, then the nails wouldn't expand, and as the leather expanded and got soft, then as you walked, you'd bore a hole in the bottom of your heel, or your sole. So essentially, you have a construction like this. Now, this particular shoe, as I say, this one would end up with a shoe that would look a little bit, I don't have a model here exactly, but a shoe that would be not the upper latch, but basically just a straight sole coming back, something like this with a sole. Now, this particular shoe would probably cost about $1.50, and one's likely to say, gee, I'd run out and buy 12 or 15 of them. But it turns out that the average day laborer earned, when he or she had work, probably about $1 a day. So you're looking at about a day and a half's wages. So if you converted that to present times, say just took $10 an hour as an easy number, it's roughly a $120 pair of shoes. So we're talking about shoes being relatively expensive all the way through time. And the shoes become more expensive as we get into other kinds of styles and things. So the simple shoe, one that I had here, basically, this would be the completed shoe like this. It's fairly simple. It doesn't have much in the way of embellishments on the back, not particularly sturdy, but it's probably a $1.50 pair of shoes. Probably, if you took care of them and waxed them and stuff, or oiled them up, lanolin, you could probably get a year out of a pair of shoes. But remember that in the 1830s and 40s, we didn't have asphalt, cement, all this kind of stuff. So we're really talking about walking on grass and rocks and those kinds of things. So that's really where it was going. Okay, so when you're sewing a shoe, you're basically using linen thread, and you basically take the thread, and for the uppers, it's probably 3, maybe 4 strands, and then you roll it up with shoemaker's wax, and it's got rosin, pitch, and beeswax in it, and then you roll it together, and then you put it on a boar bristle, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is the second type of shoe that would be, again, this is probably maybe $2 for a pair of shoes, because this involves more work and various things. Now, the best thought, and from the shoemaker's manuals and things in the 1830s, is that a shoemaker probably kept about 70 cents out of $1 or $1.50. So it wasn't a particularly lucrative trade. It was one that people could pretty much get into. Took a lot of skills that you learned on the job, but that's pretty much how it worked. Okay, the next shoe from here, we move up to a sewn sole, and the sewn sole shoe basically is sewn on the sides, up the back. It's lined on the inside, and then has a welt put around the outside of it. And so what I've got, the welts are tacked in just to keep them in place, and then I'm sewing around. And this, the welt particularly for this is something like this. So you cut a couple of grooves around the shoe. You then lay it on the bottom of the last, where this would be, and then you basically sew the upper through and come up. So that's what you're seeing in this particular case. Again, sewn with boar bristles and a curved awl. So then you finished it. To finish this shoe, you would essentially put a heel on it and put pegs on it. Now, the heels were popular until I would say the early 1700s for men, and then the heels pretty much went away. As you move more and more towards the 1800s, the heels pretty much started disappearing, even with ladies' shoes in the late 1700s. And so this particular shoe is probably pretty representative of an 1800 shoe for a lady. And it's neither right or left, and it's basically put together. It's lined on the inside with cotton or with linen and leather and so forth. So this would be probably a $2, maybe $2.50 pair of shoes. So they're, again, pretty pricey. They'll last a little bit longer than the earlier shoes. And one of the advantages is if you have wear a hole in the bottom of your shoe, with this particular shoe, you can sort of cut the sole, and you can cut the seam, and then you can just replace half a sole. And so that makes it more attractive, longer lasting, and just, a little nicer pair of shoes. Which brings up kind of an interesting question. There's a sort of a hierarchy, and shoemakers are really considered higher or better trade than a cobbler. And a cobbler pretty much actually repaired shoes and worked on shoes that were already made. And so cobblers probably didn't get paid as much as shoemakers. And again, in the system, we're not seen as quite as high skill. All right, now, so we've talked a little bit about how the shoes are made. Boots are basically the same principle. You make the boot on the inside out, and so it's inside, and you turn it around. I don't know if I brought it on, I guess I didn't, but you turn around a piece of wood that basically is shaped like this. You basically smooth the boot out and make the leather, and then you basically sew up a welt in the inside, and then put up a heel stiffener and pulls. So essentially, this is an 1836 pattern from Shively, and it's pretty much would be representative of what you would see in this period. As you get closer to the Civil War, the back part tends to come in closer, and the boot pulls tend to be on the inside. But they're basically the same. This is neither right or left. It's got a higher heel. As you move closer to the 1850s, the heels tend to get higher. So they'll go from the 1820 up till, say, 1850 or so. And as you get to the 1850s, the toes tend to get rounder. And as your earlier times, the toes tend to be more pointed. So again, peg soles, multiple heels, and you put them like this. And this is pretty much how it works. So essentially, those are pretty much the styles, common styles. And again, they were far more expensive and handmade type shoes. We talked earlier about the pegs and making the pegs, and this is essentially a peg making plane. So this is a wooden plane, and you take a piece of wood and then you shave this way, and it cuts off the various points. So this is you cut it this way, and then your block of wood has points, basically. And then what you can do is you can go a long way, and it'll cut out the pegs. So this is a job that probably was done by an apprentice or someone who's actually just starting out working with leather. So let's talk a little bit about how the shoes are made and the various processes involved. First of all, leather in some cases has to be thinned, and you can get leather. Obviously, the back of a older cow will have, and everything here is made by cowhide, from cowhide. But the older cow basically is going to have a longer or a thicker hide, and so what we have is a splitter. And this basically is that you just pulled a piece of leather through, and it just shaves it down to whatever type of thickness that you need to have. A second thing that's of use is basically having some way to sew your upper. So in this particular case, what I'm doing is I'm taking an awl, a curved awl, and I don't have the curved awl here, I guess, but basically it's an awl that is bent on the bottom. So you go through and make the holes. Then you take a boar bristle, which is a hog hair, and you roll it up based on some string. So there's no glues or anything. You're just basically, rolling it up, and then you're taking it through, and you're going through one way and then the other. So you're pulling it tight, and then you end up with a stitch that looks like this. And again, this would be the back stitch, and then you can see that I'm going to put the vamp on in a few minutes. So that's pretty much how that comes together. The way you break off the pegs is with a colting stick, and this basically is a piece of granite or whatever the stone is, and then basically go through and you're shaving it off. So you're essentially rounding off your pegs, and then you're taking the wood part and you're smoothing down the sole. Now this is usually wet when you're doing it, and you can make a pretty finished shoe as you're looking through. So essentially that's that particular part of the operation. The kinds of tools that were used for the most part in shoemaking was really a pegging awl, which is an awl that has a round shaft, but it comes with a square point. And the idea being that when you drive this peg into the hole, into the shoe, make the hole, and essentially you're driving a square peg in a round hole. I don't think that's what that was, where that expression came from. But essentially it's the idea that the leather's wet, you drive this peg in, and then it dries tight. And that's the process for making the shoe. Now, when you're finished with the shoe, or pretty well put together, then you need to burnish the sole. And the way, or burnish the edges, you don't want your shoe, and this one's not ready yet, but you don't want this to absorb water and kind of rot or whatever happens here. So essentially you want to kind of seal this off. And you do that with an iron, and you see these in many antique stores. The process is that you heat this up. It's an alcohol lamp, and then you have a burnishing tool on top of it. So you heat this up, you heat your wax a little bit, and you go around the shoe. It's probably a better example. To go around the shoe, something like that. Then when this is warm, you essentially take this and just go over the shoe, and you're just going back and forth. And this then seals the wax in, and so your shoe will then last longer. And these come in many different sizes and shapes. Some of them are relatively fancy. Some of them are pretty plain. There was a lot of discussion early on about how to preserve shoes and how to preserve leather. And one of the recipes that's kind of standard through is that they use lanolin, and beeswax and cod oil. And so what we have here is essentially a little jar that shoemakers kept in their toolbox. This particular shoe pegging jack was made prior to the Civil War, and you can see it's pretty rustic in terms of the crank and so forth, but you lay the shoes in here and you can set the adjustment how much you want. And then this was kind of a major invention because it allowed a shoemaker to have both hands free. So what we're doing is we're pulling the sole around when it's wet and getting it tight. Then we're basically taking the hammer, and if we're doing nails, we typically use the lasting pliers rather than the hammerhead. And the hammerhead needs to be pretty shiny and smooth so that when you're hitting leather, it doesn't leave marks. So what we're doing here is we're basically either putting the peg in with the lasting pliers, or we're using it to put in nails or whatever. But these lasting pliers are pretty common, and this one was made prior to the Civil War, and it's a pretty useful kind of tool in the trade. People sometimes ask about sizes, and did we have sizes? And the answer is yes, but they weren't very consistent. It started out that we had a certain distance, and then it was a barley corn added additional size. And then in the 1850s, we have more and more standard sizes. This is a size stick, for instance, that was made in the, about 1855 or 650. It's hand lettered and all of that, you can see. And what you're doing is you're taking the person's foot, and then you're figuring out what is the size. And men's sizes were different than ladies. Men's were typically about 2 larger than ladies. So essentially you lay your last in, or you lay your foot in, and then put your last and measure it. And this is pretty much how you put it together. The difficulty is that my sizes might not be the same as the next shoemaker. So as a result, you had difficulty kind of going between. Now, fast forward to about 1880s, and we get standard sizes. So after 1885 or so, we're really looking at pretty standard sizes for the shoes. And that pretty much describes most of the kind of things that I think you'd want to know in terms of making shoes. It was a difficult trade. It wasn't too hard to learn, but it was very difficult because you're sitting down all the time. But it also attracted people who had difficulties maybe being really active, like a blacksmith or something like that. But you'll see a lot of these tools as you travel around to antique stores and things, and this will give you some sense of how they were used and what their purpose was.